Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so glad you're all here with us tonight. We're just about to get started. So good evening, everyone. By now, you should all have prepared your dinner with the guidance of our awesome instructional video. Everyone that is present, please take a moment and just make sure you're set on mute. Okay. Thank you. Everyone's on mute. Beautiful. Okay. Well, we are beyond thrilled to bring to you tonight's experience, a collaboration between Frog's Leaf Winery, Rogers & Co. Wines, and our French concept restaurant, Gardelès Brasserie, where I'm sitting tonight. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Kathleen. I'm the Director of Events and Catering here at Ascari Hospitality Group. Quick intro for us. We are a Toronto-based restaurant company, and over the course of this very wild year, our dedicated team has been keenly designing new ways of bringing our signature style of warmth and genuine hospitality to you safely, from world-class wine dinners like this, holiday-themed menus like our upcoming Father's Day kits, which are now available. We have a host of corporate virtual experiences and also a bustling online shop, Mercatino e Vini. So please be sure to check out all of our offerings on our website, ascarihg.com. And stay up to date on all of the awesome programming going on around here by following us on Instagram at AscariHG if you haven't done so already. For everyone out there, we have to say we cannot wait to have you dine safely again in our dining rooms and soon to be patios. But in the meantime, let us know, what do you want to see more of? I'm always ears. You all have my contact information. Send me an email, direct message us on Instagram. We have a contact us feature on our website. We love hearing from you and staying connected. So once again, from all of us here at Ascari, a huge heartfelt thank you for your continued support. Before we begin, just a couple obligatory housekeeping notes. Please continue to keep yourselves on mute throughout the discussion. The hustle and bustle of your kitchens really does carry through the audio, but feel free to type in all of your questions into the chat feature below. Our talk tonight is going to be moderated by Ascari Hospitality Group's executive chef and co-owner, John Sinopoli. He will be sure to catch all your questions and make sure they get answered by our guest speaker tonight. If you want to use the raise your hand feature here at the bottom here on Zoom, feel free, and Chef John will ask you to unmute and you can engage at that time as well. So on to our main event. Since 1988, Frog's Leaf Winery has been well known for its advancement of the principles of organic grape growing, dry farming, and many aspects of biodynamics. It was named American Winery of the Year by Wine and Spirits magazine. I'm particularly excited to hear all about the core values on balance and restraint, which are so clearly evident in tonight's spectacular wines, and how you have to innovate and do less. It is said about Frog's Leaf, I read this quote, over the years, there's one thing that you have seen from Frog's Leaf time and time again, and that is its willingness to change, innovate, improve, and to refine. And I know that is something that definitely resonates with all of us and the entire Ascari family. So we are so delighted to introduce to you tonight our featured speaker. Here to talk about the obsession with healthy farming and the effects of preserving the biodiversity around a vineyard, and how wines are living, sentient creatures that communicate with its surrounding environment. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our guest of honor tonight, Frog's Leaf Winery's owner and winemaker, John Williams. Take it away, Chef.
Thanks, everybody. Welcome, John. Two Johns here hosting the night. So excited, obviously, like Kathleen said, to have such an iconic winery and its winemaker here in Toronto by virtue by a virtual Zoom call. But really, it's like, you know, we had a quick chat before the call, and I think everyone's going to be super interested to hear, you know, the approach, not just the winemaking, but the farming in general, and to growing things. And I know I am. So, John, welcome aboard. Welcome to the Ascari Hospitality Group and Rogers & Co. event. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thanks, Chef. And can I ask everyone, I see a few people with glasses in front of them, but I'm not comfortable speaking to people who aren't drinking. So please pour a glass of wine. I want to see your glasses up here. And there we go. Oh my gosh, you guys are already onto the Cabernet there. I see a few glasses of Chardonnay. As long as we're all drinking together, we're having good fun. It's great to see you. I wish I could be in Toronto with you. Let's hopefully this is all going to be. I'm getting a little tired of all this virtual stuff, but hey, at least we're together, and so it's great to be here. And let's have some fun. A little shout out to my friends Harrison, Tina, and of course to Elizabeth, who brought us all together tonight. Rogers and Company has been, God, I don't even know how long. Maybe those guys can know, but it's been a couple decades, I think, and so. We love to be part of what's happening in Toronto in Canada, and it's nice to be with you virtually at least.
I love it. Santé, cheers, everybody. I still got the Chardonnay in my glass, John. I mean, when I was tasting these wines for the pairing, it had been many, many years since I had a glass of Frog's Leap, and since and many of those years ago, I probably didn't know as much about wine. Or hadn't tasted as much, and I was just shocked at, the acidity, the length, and tell me a little bit about your approach in the vineyard that carries through. I know there's lots to talk about in terms of how you farm, but just give us the bare bones for people who are new to Frog's Leap here.
Yeah, well, Kathleen hit on it, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kathleen. We have been now, this is our 41st year, so we've been at this for a little while. We started in 1981. I sold my motorcycle and made 500 cases of wine, and I'm now $22 million in debt, so it's going real good. We're having a lot of fun, I came up from a farming background and rapidly discovered that winemaking was as much or more about the growing of the grape than it is about the making of the wine. And so we have been dedicated to the idea of balance and restraint and respect for this kind of ethereal quality that we call terroir, all the actors that, and I mean that not only in the personal sense, but in the minerals of the soil and the air that the grapevines breathe and the water that they drink. All these contribute to the personality of the wine. And we want that personality to be very distinctive place. And this is not a new concept, of course, but it's one that we've embraced from the very beginning and still bring to that. And that leads to a lot of farming questions that we can talk about, certainly the organic, but also dry farming, no supplemental irrigation, which we've had hardly any rain this year. Could you please send us some? And so and then the whole biodynamics, biodiversity question. These are all focused on making these wines of balance and restraint and respect for the natural expression of the vine, really bringing out the personalities of these wines. And the result, quite frankly, are wines that go well with food. I had an important wine critic tasting with me once, and I could tell the tasting wasn't going that well because this has been the era of big Napa Cabernets and very bold wines and so on, all about beating you over the head and dragging you into the cave by your hair. And finally, he looked at me with such disgust and said, "Why do you make your wines in such a drinkable style?" And I said, "Well, we did a little market research and we found out that's what most people do with them." And he never got it, quite frankly. And that was the last of our conversations. But we sell such a high percentage of our wine to people who actually drink it that we feel somewhat obligated to make wines that are drinkable. So with apologies, that's what we have here.
I love it. And I want to talk about the pairing a little bit, because as soon as I tasted it, I'm like, this is the kind of wine I want to drink with a bit of a sharp cheese that has some texture, but also is rich and velvety. And so we were super fortunate to be working with a cheesemaker in Prince Edward County here in Ontario, who's actually also a winemaker, as it turns out. And thanks to Elizabeth thing before that, you're actually born and raised on a dairy farm. So there's a lot of connections to cheese and wine here at the same time. And, this cheese here is Milford Reef sheep's milk cheese from Lighthall Vineyard. And it's so sharp but velvety and kind of soft at the same time, luxurious. I think it goes perfectly with this wine. But I'd love for you to talk about, the terroir of Rutherford and the terroir just outside where Frog's Leap is, and why. And I know this white is from Carneros, but what about the terroir brings the acidity to this wine and makes it such a food-friendly pairing?
Yeah, well, I'm dying here, to be honest with you, Chef, because when I saw that sheep's milk cheese on the menu and realizing I'm only going to have to kind of salivate as you guys eat it in front of me, and someone showing me the plate of the next course here, you're killing me, you guys, because I'm as much about eating as I am about drinking, believe it or not. But yes, I think what I love about cheese and what so much of us love about cheese is the same idea, and that's that they exhibit terroir themselves. With cheese, it's all about the grass and the animal. With wine, it's all about the soil and the grape and variety and so on. And so, a lot of similarities with this idea that a cheese or a wine or so many other things have this unique personality of place. And of course, to have that personality, they have to be deeply connected to that place, and thus that's really the reason that we farm organically. We want the minerals that are in this wine to have come from the actual soil that it grows from, not out of a fertilizer bag. We want the water that is composes 88% of this wine to be from the soil that the plant grows in, not out of a black pipe bringing water from somewhere else, right? And so this whole idea of connecting this grapevine to and allowing it to express its natural purpose forward in the wine. And thank you for noticing the acidity of that. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big fan of a lot of California Chardonnays. I would rarely choose one because often they're, not to be pejorative, I'll go ahead and be pejorative. They taste like tropical fruit flavored pancake syrups. They're so sweet, they're so heavy, they're so oaky, they're so rich, and they are so crushingly bad with food that that can't be a good choice. I think there's another choice, and actually there's a path I went down for a long time of what I would call the faux Burgundy path, where you actually are trying to imitate how they make Burgundy. And I spent a lot of time in Burgundy, and I don't regret a moment of it, but I was trying to copy because I admired the wines there so much. And so we would get cuttings from Montrachet and hang out with Dominic Lafon and Smoke Little Friend and get the same barrels that they had and do the exact same process that they did. And I see Chef laughing because I think he knows what I know. And that's when you try to imitate another dish, you almost always fail. I think it's okay to be inspired by the wines from Burgundy, but this wine is made in such a different way than a Burgundy style wine would be made that I actually think it comes closer to what a Burgundy wine stands for than had I tried to imitate the actual recipe for making Chardonnay. So yes, the wine is picked much earlier because these are 40-year-old vines. Are deeply connected to this decomposed shale, thus the name shale and stone. It's grown in decomposed shale and has been for 40 years now. And it's actually aged in concrete. And so shale and stone, that's where we get and I think the result here is a wine that is really deeply connected to the terroir, beautifully balanced, much lower in alcohol than a typical California Chardonnay. So enjoy a second glass, that's okay. And actually I'm actually surprised we have any of this to drink the rate my wife drinks it. The fact that there are a few bottles left for y'all is amazing. So actually a Chardonnay we drink at home and enjoy, and I hope it's going well with that sheep's milk cheese and the hazelnuts too. I think you get a little bit of that kind of reductive hazelnutty sort of character in this wine that comes from 12 months on the original fermentation lees, which in this big concrete vat, and very, very much a part of the wine.
Well, I loved how this wine had both the body and the acidity of a beautiful Chardonnay, but without, like you said, the buttery, cloying sweetness. And also, I couldn't agree with you more about being inspired by a region or a dish or someone, but not trying to imitate, because we like to say our cooking in Toronto here. We have 2 Italian restaurants and a French restaurant. But of course, we don't live in France or Italy, so I don't have the raw materials at the disposal. But we cook through the eyes of the produce we have available, inspired by the places that we love. So that's really
say
what
that
we're
again.
about.
I'm going to write that down. I can use that in a winemaker now. That was really good.
Yeah, I mean, it's
well, this is recorded. I can get this on the
there
recording. Go ahead.
Partners and I've been talking for a decade and a half, and we've been really honing what we do, and just like you have for 40 years in Napa Valley, and you have to be tied to the place, otherwise you just like an imitator. and you have to use the ingredients and the inspiration of the produce around you. But it doesn't mean you can't say, hey, like, I love this like style of dish. I love this approach to this ingredient. So we take, you know, the European model as an approach to ingredients, but we use what we have available. And so, you know, for example, yeah, like this cheese tonight is a perfect example of the incredible sheep's milk, like the quality of milk we have available in Prince Edward County. It's amazing. And so, I mean, this, you know, the pea shoots, everything, it's all grown locally. It's a little bit, it's hothouse now this time of year. We're not California, so we're not harvesting too much out of the ground at the moment, other than rhubarb. But, you know, it's for sure, it's the kind of thing that it signifies our approach. I want to talk about it here too, because I've been in Napa Valley, and I remember just seeing row after thousands of rows of grapes on the valley floor. Where is your winery in relationship to the valley floor? And is it have a little bit of elevation? And you know, you don't irrigate, so do you have a natural body of water or river that flows through you? Tell us about the microclimate of your vineyards.
Sure, it might take a little while, John, because we farm about 10 different vineyards on all different kinds of aspects. So this Chardonnay, for example, comes from a steep hillside down in Carneros, the True Chard vineyard. These grapes, I mean, it's part of my fitness program is sampling this vineyard every year. It's a really straight uphill. And so we farm hillside grapes. And in the case of that, the Chardonnay. Our Zinfandel is grown, and our Cabernets are grown on what we call the benchlands. So if anyone who's familiar with Burgundy, for example, you know, the grapes aren't grown up on the top of the hill, and nor are they grown on the bottom of the hill. They're grown on that bench in between, where the soil is good enough to grow a grape, but not too deep to allow it to grow luxuriously. And so our Cabernet Sauvignon and Zinfandel grapes are grown on what we call benches. We do have a little vineyard, little 50 acres on the valley floor where the soil is deep, and that's where we grow our Sauvignon Blanc. So a lot of people say, why do you make so many different wines? You make 2 white wines, a Sauvignon Blanc, a Chardonnay. We make a beautiful Zinfandel, we make a Merlot, and we make a Cabernet Sauvignon. And the reason is that we have all these different soil types. Now, and if you can match the right variety to the soil types, you're way ahead of the game. You know, Napa is everyone thinks about Cabernet when they think about Napa, and it's 87% of our red grapes now in Napa are Cabernet Sauvignon. I would say maybe 30% of the Napa Valley is appropriate for Cabernet Sauvignon, but here it's become 85%. And the reason is, well, it's Napa, it's Cabernet. In fact, the vineyard where our beautiful Sauvignon Blanc comes from, gorgeous Sauvignon Blanc, everyone who knows it, and all 4 vineyards on all 4 sides of it are planted to, guess what? Cabernet Sauvignon. And I go to my neighbors and say, why would you plant Cabernet Sauvignon on these soils? They're too rich, it's too good, you're not going to make great Cabernet. And they look at me and they say, you can make more money with bad Cabernet than you can great Sauvignon Blanc. What the heck's wrong with you? So maybe it's just a little bit different approach, I guess. But so that's part of the reason that we make multiple varieties, is that we have multiple soil types, everything from steep hillside to valley floor. And so we're farming about 200 grapes. I'm sorry.
We appreciate that you're not so bottom line driven because the wines are so amazing. And I'll tell you, the same conversation happens here in Ontario with our 2 winemaking regions, where people tended to plant 10, 15 years ago what they thought would sell, what the market wanted. And now they're all switching. A lot of them are good winemakers have been switching over the past 20 years to grape varietals that actually suit the climate, like, you know, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and mainly Riesling in Niagara. So it's pretty interesting that you had the same approach, but you figured that out 30 years ago.
We're still trying to figure it out. Thank you very, very much, John. I have to tell my last time I was in Toronto was a tasting put on for a number of biodynamic producers. And, you know, my family is just below Buffalo, where I grew up, and down by the Pennsylvania line in Chautauqua County. Oh, yeah. That's where our dairy farm was. And so I'd been down visiting my folks. It's been a number of years. They both passed now. The rest of my family still lives there. But I was coming up to do this tasting in Toronto, and at the border, the guy asked me what I was doing. He says, well, I'm going to a wine tasting up in Toronto. I said, I'm a winemaker. and he asked me whether I'd ever had the wines of the Niagara Peninsula. And I said, I've heard a lot about them. And he says, oh, you have no idea. I was there for 45 minutes while this border guard was talking about the wines of the Niagara. I mean, there are cars lined up for miles behind us. He didn't give a damn. He was so excited about the wines of so I made wines in the Finger Lakes, so I know how good those Rieslings can be, and make beautiful wines. But that's my last Toronto story for the night, anyway. And if that border guard's online today, I apologize for telling that story, but it was so funny. He was so impassioned, and that's what wine can do to people, isn't it? It's wonderful.
For sure. I mean, there's lots in the chat tonight about people's memories and of drink. A wine someone bought for them 10 years ago, or 1988 Frog's Leap. Tell us about some of those incredible back vintages. People like your winery, you're at a point in your career where people are remembering some of the greats. And tell us about some of the really memorable back vintages, and what do you think are some of the best vintages of the past, like 5 or 6 years, that people can still buy and hold?
Yeah, well, we're fairly unique that way in that I have been the winemaker for all 41 years. I'm very pleased to have handed over a number of those responsibilities to my son now, who does all of our farming for us, but is also taken over quite a bit of the winemaking responsibility. We elevated my cellar master for he's been with me almost 30 years. We elevated him to winemaker this year, and his daughter, who has grown up with us, just became our assistant winemaker. So we are a family of winemakers. It's actually fairly rare for a Napa winery to be run by the actual winemaker, believe it or not. And I mean, that sounds so counter to what you would think. But we grow it, we make it and we sell it ourselves, and that's a big deal. I have to say that my memories of vintages tend to be personal memories. So, like, why wouldn't I love the '88 Cabernet? It's the year my beautiful daughter was born. It was a miserable vintage in terms of rain and other problems, but so I tend to associate vintages with personal things that were happening. And I honestly think it's a great way to drink older wines, is to use them almost as liquid time capsules. Good wineries won't make bad wine even in the toughest of vintages, and so we're proud of every vintage that we've had. I know that's a little bit of a cliche, but it's very much the case with us. We have to drink more of this than anyone else, and so I do one wine tasting that I'm very, very fond of, called the worst wine tasting ever, and it's I pull out wines from the 5 worst vintages as rated by the critics in the last 30 years. And I say, this is the 5 worst wines that we actually made. And so this is going to be our wine tasting tonight. And of course, they're all extremely fine wines, but they're all from the worst vintages as far as the critics were concerned. And so I think that's it. I think the other thing that is true about our wines is that these wines have extremely long lives. And that's really important to us. So there isn't a wine that we've made back to 1981, particularly in the red wines, obviously, where we're not proud to open them and taste them with folks. I learned very, very early in my winemaking career. I was the first winemaker at Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. That's where the leap comes from in our name. And so I made the wines there in 74, 5, and 6, the whole time of the Paris tasting. And so we were making these beautiful wines, very balanced and very restrained, and everyone would call them very pretty wines, and aren't these lovely, and we should probably drink them right away. But at the same time, people were starting to make these big hairy monsters, that would club you over the head and drag you to the cave, and we would taste these and we'd hack and spit them out and go, God damn, I bet that's going to be good in 20 years. And I'll be honest with you, that was a big mistake. I think wines are very much like people. If you're ugly when you're young, you're going to be ugly when you're old. It really is this ability to have balance from the very beginning that is so fundamental to a wine's being able to age. So don't make that mistake. I made it for you, if you will.
I love that take that you're either good when you're young, you're either good or you're not, and then you're not going to change. I mean, it's the truth. People don't change. Wines change, but yeah, you're right. The quality's got to be there from the beginning. I love that so much. let's start talking about the Cabernet. I think it's time to move on to course 2. Our approach to the food here.
Let me see a thumbs
to be
up or two on the
honest-
Chardonnay, though. What did you guys think of that wine? Yeah.
I'd love to hear what people think. I mean, there's a lot of comments about how delicious it was and the pairing was good, but specifically, I'd love to hear what people think about that Cabernet. It is not your typical California Chardonnay, rather, of course, as to become expected from your winery. But I mean, everyone's loving it. Everyone's loving it. I think that when we approached the main course, part of my pairing approach was cliche, like, what do you eat with a big California cab? Well, you have a steakhouse dinner, right? So we said, let's go traditional steakhouse dinner, but let's do it our way. And our way is basically use the local stuff that makes sense in the time of year. So we made the maitre d'hotel, the beurre de maitre d'hotel, basically the butter that went on top of the steak is a wild leek butter, a ramp butter. So I don't know if you get ramps in California, but you'll remember them from your time farming in Pennsylvania, I'm sure, because they're native to there, and they're native up here too. And we're very fortunate that part of the Ascari family has a farm in Creemore up here, and we have a number of acres of woods that we can go and tease out. And we're really great about keeping them in the forest, but basically coming back down to the restaurants with garbage bags full of these things that makes a pesto, steamed fish with, or makes a butter with. So ramp butter on top of the steak tonight for everybody. And really, it's hard to go too bold for this wine, I think. At the same time, the wine, like you said, is much prettier, much more feminine than I've come to expect from typical California cabs. Talk to us about the vineyard, the Rutherford vineyard, and why the character of this wine is so unique.
Well, thank you. And I think you hit it on the line. And by the way, I was, as often I find myself, I was also drawn to the vegetarian option here. I don't know if anyone grabbed the Savoy cabbage pack up. That looked really pretty interesting too. Where I grew up, ramps were called weeds. And so I'm not sure that we ever quite got it. My family were not exactly gourmands, but I miss that, and there is so much that I miss from.
Well, they're about $40 a pound now at the gourmet grocery stores.
So
definitely not a weed.
I hear you. Well, the secret to Cabernet, of course, is that it is a very, very it grows very, very specific soils, and that's why it is very expressive of terroir if it's grown in those kind of soils. And by terroir, we mean the personality of the wine. I think this is a concept I can't stress enough. Is this because people get very confused about what this idea of terroir is? First of all, most people don't know enough French to be able to pronounce it right, including myself. But leave it to the French to be able to use one word to describe something that would normally take someone in the English language about 8 paragraphs to explain. But it really is the personality of the wine that comes from all the influences, everything from its DNA to the soil that it's grown into, the air that's breathed, to the hands that prune and shape these vines, to the soil and dug out of the cave where this wine ages, and so on, all the actors, we call it. But the ultimate result of this is making a wine that's unique to place. And, Rutherford, this is all estate grown fruit from Rutherford, is only 2 miles by 3 miles. It's the size of Pauillac in the Médoc, for any of our Bordeaux lovers. I mean, I literally live right in the middle of it and can walk to the border. I can each morning in both directions. But Cabernet needs to be grown with dry feet, gravelly soils. So all the great Cabernets in the world are grown in gravelly soils, which you tend to find in these benchlands coming off the hillside. And that's what you get here. And the unique character about it that's so recognizable is this kind of earthy, dusty character that my mentor, a great winemaker named Andre Chelsteff, called Rutherford Dust, and is very, very unique to this small area of the Napa Valley. Napa Valley is an extremely small place in and of. It's 25 miles long and 2 miles wide. It's roughly a third the size of the Médoc. I mean, it's only where 4% of California wine comes from. It's a small area, and this is even a smaller area within that. And even in Rutherford, this is a smaller area because it's the kind of soils that can grow great Cabernet Sauvignons. Difficult vintage, 2017. It might make one of my worst vintages in the last 30 years, just because of many of you may remember the wildfires that we had in Napa in 17 and again, of course, in 2020. Don't get me started on climate change, but you know, a distinct impression of this vintage is the difficulty that came from the heat spell and the fires that followed. We were very fortunate to be able to make great wine in this vintage, but nearly a third of it had to be declassified and not allowed to go into the final blend. So a vintage we're very proud of, perhaps a little less expressive of terroir than the superb 18 vintage, which is coming online, but still expressive enough. And I think reflective of the vintage. We won't drink this wine ever in our life again without remembering the effort that it took and the sacrifice that it took to make this wine, including a third of our profits this year, because we said that wine wasn't good enough for our blend. So I drink these wines with those kind of memories. And ultimately, I think this is what's fun about concentrating on a few wineries in terms of the wines that you put in your cellar, because then you can start sharing those memories with that winery and start to live through those experiences again and add that to your collection of knowledge every time you open a bottle over the next 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years that this wine will be alive and giving pleasure. So I've been rambling here, but it's really what Cabernet Sauvignon is.
I love the idea of wine as a time capsule that you mentioned earlier in the evening, and this wine is a perfect example of that. We've got a question from Faith. She said, "Do you believe the smoke left an impression or taste on this wine?"
It certainly did not. You know, it's a great question, and I think it's a question anyone should ask themselves when they try a wine from the 17. What I'll guarantee is this wine has no influence from smoke taint, is what we call it. But I can't guarantee you that about the third of the wine that we sold off to other people. And so, and that was really part of the decision. All the grapes in this wine were picked long before the fires happened. And that's the kind of sacrifice in same last year, really. And many wineries were forced with the decision of not making any wine into 2020 vintage because all their Cabernet was out during the fires. And boy, I believe this gets into deeper questions about our climate and how it's changing and influencing the Napa Valley.
Well, John, that's a perfect segue because, you know, it's always on my list now dinners to ask the winemaker, how has climate change affected how you grow your grapes and making your wine? And it's funny because we asked this question of Ascari, who's the winemaker at Chateau Moussard in the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon at a wine event we did just like this very recently. And his answer is very interesting. They're purchasing and planting vines at higher elevations. And they're saying that's the only way forward with climate change. I wonder, like, what's your take on that? Do you have that option in the expensive real estate? And like, how does climate change, how has it affected your winemaking in the wines you're making the past 5 to 6 years? But more importantly, how has it affected your forward-looking approach?
Well, it's a huge question, obviously, John, and I like to start this conversation by saying that, you know, it seems like the wine industry has become the canary in the coal mine. Everyone, assumes that climate change is happening to us and it's not happening to them. In fact, I was down in Florida before the pandemic, and I was getting an Uber ride back from a wine dinner, and the Uber driver says, "Where are you from?" I said, "Oh, from the Napa Valley in California." He says, "Oh my God, Napa Valley, that's where you have all that global climate change." And, yeah, you're so lucky not to have any of that here in Florida. And his answer was, "Yeah, I know, that's why everyone's moving here." And you may feel that way up in Toronto, but you know what? Be very, very careful in that thought, because people are saying, "Well, what are you going to do in 30 years when you can't grow Cabernet Sauvignon in the Napa Valley?" And I said, we don't know, honestly, because, you know, we understand there's also going to be global devastation of our economy. There's going to be widespread inundation of our coastal cities. There's going to be an economic collapse. There's going to be pestilence and desertification of all of our agricultural lands. And my Cabernet might not taste so good. This is a big problem. You know, all I'm asking is everyone to put this a little bit in perspective, as we do at the winery. So we're not willing to give up on the idea that we can mitigate this, we can reduce the slowing of climate change, and that with thoughtful farming we can actually reverse climate change by incorporating more organic matter into the soil. Agriculture has tremendous capacity. If every farmer in Canada and the United States came together and said, look, let's absorb this carbon and get it back into our soils using compost and cover crops, we could solve the climate problem in and of ourselves. So let's not give up on that possibility. This idea that we're going to move our vineyards or plant other varieties or buy land in Oregon or something, that's the kind of hubris that got us into this problem in the first place. The idea that we can buy our way out of this problem. I don't think this is a problem that as I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox here. You asked for this. I love it. I don't think this is a problem that we can buy our way out of, to be honest with you. Not only as winemakers, but as humanity. And I think any person who's not concerned about these issues should re-examine them, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it is definitely a topic of conversation here in Ontario about regenerative farming and farming that properly, is not monoculture. It's not as simple as just no monoculture farming. It's much more about practicing the right way, and it's not just about scale. It's also about practice. It's super interesting. Totally. Regenerative agriculture is the way. And my partner Eric's making a comment on the chat. It's the way of the future and must be adopted universally. And it's true that we have some leaders in that here in Ontario. We have some real people at the forefront of that industry, and University of Guelph is big into that as well. But definitely in Creemore, the area just north of Toronto, there's a lot of people practicing this. It's super topical, but it's got to be more than a trend. It has to be like universally accepted, and that's the challenge. I mean, when I drive through, the coastal regions of California, you see like the massive amounts of monocultures going on, and you wonder, like, in 5-6 years, what's going to happen there? And it's a challenge. Having said that, I don't want to take away from the fun of the evening. I don't want to get too serious. We are drinking wine, eating steak and mushrooms and sherry sauce. And I want to talk about the thinking behind the sherry cream sauce for this, because it really is kind of it speaks to the approach we have with the pairing, what I think about this wine. And what I thought about this wine when I tasted it is that it's got the grip of a typical California Cabernet, but with a lift and brightness that's not normally found. So tell me, where does that lift and energy come from in the wine that normally is kind of just like flabby, sweet fruit, cooked fruit, like dark, kind of that typical like flavor profile? Because you've got the good stuff about what Napa brings, and with like the tannins and the structure, but with that added lift. And that's why I can put a full plate of rich food in front of people, and this wine cuts right through it.
Well, thank you for noticing, and you're killing me by the description of all this food that I can't taste, by the way. But but I can't taste the wine, and it's one of the. It's actually very sad for me to discuss this, not to bring people down again here, but I mean the idea that this is Napa's potential is to make these beautiful wines, but there was a movement really in the late 70s, early 80s towards these bigger style of Napa Cabernets, and they've developed their own cult around them, and it 100% goes back to the way the grapes are farmed. When we introduced irrigation, when we introduced fertilization, when we introduced monocropping, when we introduced all these things. A grapevine, we have a little piece on our website called Thinking Like a Grapevine, and I would love it for y'all to read this. It's the idea that a grapevine isn't out in the vineyard thinking about how to make great Napa Cabernet. It's thinking about how to get its berries ripe so birds will eat them and shut the seed somewhere else. I mean, that's what its life is all about, right? And so it wants to bring its grape into perfect balance, not for the making of wine, but to spread its seed, basically. And so it needs to protect its seed when it's out there. Because of if the seed is not hard inside the berry and the bird takes it, then it will never germinate. So that's why grapes are, when they're underripe, taste bitter and have too much acidity, don't have any flavor, don't have any sugar, don't have any color. But when its hormonal cycle says that my seed is getting hard, that's when it starts to build sugar and flavor and reduces the acidity. It actually metabolizes the malic acid to make the esters, the aromatic compounds. It polymerizes its tannins so it's no longer bitter. All with this to come to this perfect moment, not to make great wine, but to say, here, birdie, 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 right? And that's the balance in wine, and that's what we've captured here. So we're using this idea that this is the grapevine's actual intent. And when but a grapevine has to know how to make those decisions, and that comes from having connectivity to the soil by drinking the actual water, to having its roots down deep into the ground, to have its leaves exposed to measure the angle of the sun and the phase of the moon, to have other and we grow 30 other crops at Frog's Leap besides grapes. I mean, we have cherry, peaches, big apple, and this is a big part of building this polyculture, this biodiversity in the farming system, because we know all these species of life communicate. Insects, all these are important to this idea of having enough information in the farming system to elevate the natural intelligence of the grapevine to bring them in perfect balance, because that's the only way you can get balance in a wine. Otherwise, you're left in the winery of trying to add enough acid or take alcohol away or add color or trying to adjust. Sometimes like you have to do if you don't get good produce, you've got to, let's cover it up with a little bit of a raspberry vinaigrette. It's the same idea, right? And so really what we're trying to do.
All of our photo shoots, just for everyone out there, have not been manipulated, okay? What you saw is the food you got, yeah.
And that's what I'll say about this wine. It's not manipulated. It is just the pure expression of this vine wanting to spread its seed. And I think that's really cool. And so all of our farming
I love it.
Yeah.
And I love the way you talk about the plants and the vines having an intentionality and an agency, because you're like, they're making decisions. They're deciding when the time is right to ripen. They're deciding, and all these things are triggered by a multitude of items that are just not controllable by humans. And the more you try to control, the less you get of the actual character of the wine. The less you try to control, the more of the character of the wine becomes available to you when you're making wine. So I love it, and I love the idea.
Another thing for me to write down, John. I'm so glad you're killing me here, man.
It's $200 a page. That's what I charge. So I think that it'd be great to talk about the struggle of the roots and the vines, and we often hear that about vineyards in Europe, and well the vines have to struggle. They have to go deep. You can't just give them everything. Like, that's why rocky soils are great for making wine. Talk a little bit about how that occurs in your vineyards in particular, and why that's so important for grape growing.
Yeah, of course, it's one of the oldest sayings in the wine business. I don't happen to agree with it. What I believe is that, again, I'm putting anthropomorphizing here a little bit. I don't think that humans have to suffer to produce great work, but I do think they have to work. And an old line I use is, if you've met anyone who never had to work a day in their life, my condolences. Those are not interesting people. I think the idea that the vine has got a mind for its own minerals and has to put it through down deep. And boy, my grapevines right now, we got 14 inches of rain last year instead of 35 inches of rain. They're really they're slowing their growth down. They're adapting to this climate, and I think that's it. They're having to work, and I think we have to work to truly express who we are as humans. And so this idea that we have to sulfur, I don't necessarily agree with, but we do have to work. And so we allow our vines are living sentient beings, and with their own natural intelligence, and so we just let them be those grapevines. And we think the product is like someone who is a sentient human who's in touch with their environment and reads and intermingles with people and is exposed to travel. And so they're much more interesting people than we know those other kind of people. And we know those other kind of wines, quite frankly. So that's where we come down on this.
No, I love that metaphor about wines not struggling, but working. And it's a great insight into it. And, tell us about what else exists around your vines. like you talked about your polyculture and what else is growing. Are there animals there? What else is contributing to this wine that we taste in the glass? Because, you know, Paul said to me, like in the chat here, it was great comments. He's like, the wine jumps out of the glass. It's really alive. It's fresh. It's acidic, but there's still that black currant, you know, cedar. There's like that. I taste like a little bit of eucalyptus, some mint, all these like these items in it. What about the vineyards adding this characteristic, and what's unique maybe to your vineyard, and then what's common from your wines to Napa in general?
Yeah, well, you know, obviously, I think it's easy for us as humans to see what's above the ground, right? And a lot of it, our work goes into this idea of polyculture or biodiversity in our farming system. Not only other planted crops, but also wild plants in around in our hedgerows and so on and so forth. And that's very important. And with that, we culture a broad diversity of insect life and wildlife. And a certain amount of domestic life. Unfortunately, I'd love to have cows in our vineyard, but it's just not, it doesn't work out. In fact, we need manure to make good compost. And so I end up having to buy it from a dairy farm. If my grandfather knew that I was buying cow shit, I have to tell you all right now, he would roll around in his grave. He spent his whole life trying to get rid of cow shit, and here I'm buying it. I swear to God, it's ridiculous. Elizabeth is laughing on this one. But you know, unfortunately, we have to import our animal manure, but from a dairy farmer, and he gets wine in return, so it's all good. Don't worry about it. But I think what we focus on a lot too is what isn't seen, and that's below the ground. And that's really the promise of organic agriculture, is this rich biological complex of the soil. It's a whole life that we don't get to see or participate in. That is the foundation of our lives, by the way, is healthy soil. And what we believe is healthy living soil produces a healthy living plant, and a healthy plant naturally resists disease, just like a healthy human. And so organic farming isn't so much about not using chemicals. It's about having and not needing chemicals. It's about ourselves having a healthy lifestyle. So we're not taking the steroids and antibiotics, all the shit you see advertised on TV that has to spend half of its time talking about the bad stuff that's going to happen when you take it, right? And I think you all know what I'm talking about here. And so we concentrate a lot on this life below the ground in the soil itself. And that's really the promise of organic farming, really.
100%. I love it. I love the explanation. And there's a question here from Julia, just on the food. She says, tell us about the cured egg yolk. Is it a play on hollandaise? So yes, it is, Julia. Good catch there. So one of the side dishes tonight was the Ontario asparagus. We're in the heart of asparagus season right now here, John. And it's a special
killing me, man,
because it really is. It's the beginning of real fresh green produce in Ontario, and every chef gets super pumped about Ramsden asparagus because and soon we're gonna have peas, we're gonna have beans, we're gonna have all kinds of beautiful stuff. But yeah, it's hard to send a hollandaise in a package like this. And to be honest, I'm not sure hollandaise like pairs super well with this wine. So instead, we decided to do like a little bit of a lemon vinaigrette and a cured egg yolk that you just shave on top for some richness. So yes, that was 100% good catch. That is our play on hollandaise for tonight here. And it really also goes to show that, you know, wines here, like it was hard to go to put a foot wrong when putting food with what season we're in and what we're drinking. But I want to actually move to dessert, because when we talked about dessert, we wanted to stay in like the steakhouse theme. So we did like a New York style cheesecake. At the same time, I wanted an accent flavor that actually worked back to the Chardonnay. And so our pastry chef actually stocked to do a passion fruit pairing. And I actually think it worked well. And so if anyone's on to dessert, I hope you kept a little bit of the Shale and Stone Chardonnay.
I still have most of a bottle.
The acidity. There you go. Yeah. The acidity in the passion fruit and the richness of the cheesecake, I think, does almost what like the preserved lemon vinaigrette and that sheep's milk cheese does at the beginning with this wine. I actually think it works. And I love pairing dessert with not dessert wines, with actual fully dry wines. And I think that that's a great pairing. And to me, it works. And so Yeah, I like going back to the first wine and seeing how it tastes now in the glass after a long time. And John, tell me about your wines, because a lot of the natural wines these days, and of course, it's very trendy to make natural wines. I think you're a couple years ahead of that game. But if I'm going to open your wine and then leave it open or put the cork in, pour a glass, and then pour another glass the next day, another glass the next day, what does day 4 and 5 taste like compared to day 1?
Is that a real question, John? I've never had that happen to me.
I mean, imagine you had the personal restraint.
That's a failure of
that you show in your
imagination,
wine.
my friend. But fair enough. No, it's a question, and honestly, I think the answer would be don't be afraid of doing that, and we do that all the time. It's never a bad idea to put it in the refrigerator and keep it cool, even the red wine, and then bring it out and let it warm up a little bit. But here's what I was saying. It's the same story about aging wine, and that's that we're putting these wines into the bottle while they're still alive, and because it comes from living soil and it's not been manipulated in the wine process, and so we're actually bottling a wine that's alive in the bottle. And when you pull that cork, doesn't mean that these wines hang around. They age forever, and they'll stay open in the bottle for a long time. I'm not sure about 4 days. I like how that's ridiculous, but I mean, we open this Chardonnay, and 3 days is nothing for this. Put a cork back in it 4 days. As long as you keep it in the refrigerator, you're fine. I think the other thing to note about this wine, if you've got a little Chardonnay to go back to, is the reductivity of the wine. Reductive means that it's still, the flower hasn't completely opened on this wine, and it gives you that kind of nice little bit of hazelnutty sort of character in this wine, and that's because it spent so much time on its lees. And this idea of reductivity, I think, is an important one in wine. And the analogy I use for it is that is that of a flower. The wife sends me out to get flowers at for the house, and I come back and the flowers are all pretty, and I'm very proud of myself. She goes, "Oh my God," because what happens. Everyone here that knows when you buy flowers that are fully in bloom, 2 days later all the petals fall off, right? She buys flowers and they come back and you can barely see any color at all. And I go, "You paid money for those?" But sure enough, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we have beautiful flowers because that flower is still opening up. And that's really the analogy I use for wine. We want to get this wine into the bottle so that when you open it, it's just starting to show its flower. And that means that it's reduced. And I can get into the chemistry of that if anyone's excited. But that is not a normal way of it used to be the normal way of doing it, but now it's fairly rare because people actually are deliberately opening the petals of their wines, even while they're still in the barrel, because that's where they're rated by the wine critic. And so they're trying to show full flower in the wine before they even bottle the wine. And in the process, they knock off a lot of petals, and you open those wines and you want to drink those kind of wines right away, if you want to drink them at all, because the petals are going to fall off very quickly. Here, the petal, you're going to be fine with this wine for a little while, and obviously the Cabernet, but I mean the Chardonnay is probably a better example of that.
Yes, no, I love your.
I have such a long answer to every one of your questions.
No, I love it because I'll tell you, there's a few winemakers here in Ontario that are known for making like reductive wines, and it's true. Like the same holds true for them. That it's basically making sure that the life cycle of the wine's not altered by the winemaking, and that's clear in what we're tasting here. We're coming to the end of the hour, so there's a couple. I wanted to make sure that everyone who had questions for John got their questions in. Time flew, and when you have two people that jabber on as much as we do, that'll happen. But I just wanted to first say thank you, John, because the discussion's just been so insightful, and I love your approach. I've got a degree in philosophy, so your discussion points for me were like, oh yeah, beautiful, I get it, right on, like it's so on point. And just I can't wait to share a meal at a table with you one day when we come to Napa Valley. We're in Toronto. I'm so excited for that. And I can't wait for all of you others on the call. Now, I know that you live within an hour's drive of Toronto, at least to be in our dining room on our patios coming soon. John, I don't know if you know, but we're the longest standing closed down jurisdiction in the Western world here in Toronto. Over 360 days of no dining. We'll finally have our patios open on June 14th. We can't wait to have all of you in person so we can cheers and clink a glass and really like show you what hospitality is about. This has been great. It's an amazing surrogate, but we all know that it's not the real thing. So thank you to everybody for doing this. Faith Yes virtual events will continue through the summer and the fall. This is something we love to do. And, it's a great way to connect with winemakers, with beer makers, with mead makers, with everyone, like producers that would have to fly in otherwise. So we're super excited about continuing this, but more excited to see everybody in person. John, I can't wait for us to visit Napa. Elizabeth, I'm sure, will give us all the tips. And thank you to Rogers & Co. for helping us put this together. Thank you to Kathleen Chu and our entire events team for all the legwork they do, all the chefs and cooks and packaging and shippers you don't see behind the scenes. It's a huge endeavor to put one of these on, to send everything out to everyone's house, and to get you on the call, John. So lovely to hear your voice and hear it from the horse's mouth. And thank you, everyone. Paul Sturgis, yes, Peter will be behind the bar at Ascari when we reopen. Do not fear. Peter Hodge not going anywhere. Our well lauded and deserving bartender at Queen Street. So thank you, everybody. Paul, thanks again. It was such a pleasure, and I can't wait to walk through your vineyard one day in the not too distant future.
Well, you're all invited. We'd love to have you. I can't wait to get in and dine with you guys. And let's keep the faith, you guys. We're almost there. We're going to get there. Be safe, everyone. Come and visit me in Napa. And thanks for this wonderful hour together. Let's do it again sometime soon. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Thank you, everybody. And a shout out to Milo. I see Milo on the call. We love you, Milo. Can't wait to have you in our dining room again. Everybody, thanks so much. It was such a pleasure. We'll see you at our next virtual event coming up in just a few weeks. Check ascarihg.com for all of the upcoming events. Get on our newsletter if you want to make sure you have access. Thank you, everybody. We'll see everyone soon. Have a great evening. And go.
Thanks, Johnny. Thanks, John.